Hello, hello. I've been a bit quiet on here recently, and that's because I got a sewing job in Montreal. I'm not going to name drop the company right now because talking about your employer publicly on the internet is not necessarily a great idea for your career. However, what I will say is that they are a large brand that manufactures in various places around the world, including in Canada. Now, let me tell you, sewing in a large industrial facility is much different from sewing at home. In this video, I'll briefly outline some of the key differences. So first of all, we are not allowed to use pins for anything, including things where having pins would be very handy. Pins are not allowed anywhere in the factory because there's too much risk of them getting into the clothing, which could cause major issues when exporting and could also harm the customer. So I have gotten very good at sewing without pins. It involves a lot of finger pressing and using your hands in various ways to hold things in place. Another difference is that irons are very seldomly used. When you're sewing at home or for a school project, you're most likely using an iron quite frequently, whether that's to hold something in place before you sew it, to set a seam, to press a seam allowance open or to one side, etc. In the factory where I work, we don't do that. If a seam allowance needs to be pressed to one side, we actually generally just stitch it down instead of pressing it. This can sometimes be very finicky. For instance, I've had to sew a seam allowance down to one side that was already in between two layers of fabric, meaning I couldn't actually see the seam allowance, nor could I touch it to be able to pull it in the right direction. This involved carefully pinching/rolling the seam allowance to make sure that it is lying in the correct direction as I'm sewing, and also I finger pressed the crap out of it before starting, which makes it a lot easier since it's lying in the right direction from the beginning. There are irons in the factory, but they are primarily used by supervisors to steam imperfections out of the fabric. For instance, if I sew a little bit too wide in one spot, the seam allowance is generally 3/8 where I work, and it leaves visible holes in the fabric, then I would call the supervisor over and they would take the piece of fabric and steam out the holes. I think the reason that we don't use irons much is that it just would not be practical. There are literally hundreds of sewing operators in the factory where I work, and having us all line up to use an iron every couple minutes would be chaotic and a waste of time. And we could not conceivably all have our own iron at our workstations. That just wouldn't be safe. So we do a lot of understitching and top stitching instead. How often do you change your sewing machine's needle? Probably not that often, maybe every couple weeks, a few times a month, right? Well, guess how often we change our needles? Every single day. This is for similar reasons to the pin issue. Having bits of a broken needle inside a garment would be very problematic. So every single morning we get a new needle to insert into our machine, and if we break a needle, which thankfully hasn't happened to me yet, there is a whole procedure that you have to follow. You need to call your supervisor, there's a metal detector involved. Yeah, they take broken needles very seriously. Another difference is that we work assembly line style, so every operator has one or two jobs that they do over and over again, which allows the process to be very efficient. Something that I do enjoy about this is, first of all, it allows me to get very fast and very good at the jobs that I have. I have two jobs. And also I like that I don't have to do any of the cutting stuff. So at work, the pieces are already cut out for me. Somebody brings them to me. I sew them together. So I get that quick dopamine hit of satisfaction of just sewing stuff together fast. So it's kind of fun in that way. Another difference is the machines. We use only industrial machines in the factory where I work. There are more machines than people in this factory. There are hundreds of them, and they're really amazing. I use a regular straight stitch industrial machine, and I love it so much. It's so good. It never fails me. It rarely has any problems, and also with the foot pedal, it's one of those ones where you push forward to sew, but then you use your heel on the back of the pedal and you push down hard with your heel, and that lifts up the foot, and then you push even harder and it cuts the fabric for you and back stitches if you have the automatic back stitch set up. It allows me to be so much faster. I really love it. I don't even want to use my domestic anymore because this industrial is so good and so fast. There are also tons of different machines for a variety of different tasks. If you're sewing at home, you maybe have a domestic that does a few different things, and then maybe also a serger. Whereas in this factory, we have a bajillion types of different machines. We have a bunch of sergers, we have machines that make the buttonholes, that lay snaps, etc. And finally, the last difference I would say between sewing at home versus sewing in a factory setting is it's just a lot more intense in a factory. We sew 8 hours a day, Monday to Thursday. Friday's a bit of a shorter day, it's about 5 hours. And we start work at 7 a.m. So I get up around 6, take the bus, a little bit bleary-eyed and sleepy when I first arrive, have a little bit of a walk that wakes me up a tiny bit, and then it's sewing all day. I really do love sewing and I am enjoying my job. It has allowed me to get a lot faster and learn a lot of new techniques for how to sew without pins and how to learn to sew new things quickly. So I hope to make videos about those topics in the future. Please subscribe if you'd like to watch those. If you have any questions about what it's like to sew at a factory / in an industrial setting, please leave them below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Check out my other videos if you're a sewing geek like me, and see you in the next video.